all say that we're grateful for everybody being here, grateful to the Almighty for allowing us to be here. And without any further ado, I want to introduce our chairwoman, our wonderful, beautiful, dynamic, eloquent chair of the board for STEM4US, none other than Dr. Nicole Turner-Lee, who's also a Vice President of Policy for the Minority Media Telecommunications Council. So without any further ado, please give it up for Dr. Nicole Turner-Lee.
Thank you, setting high standards. Thank you, everybody, for being here. And I'm going to just apologize because I will be here for just a little bit. I have to excuse myself. But I want to say again, thank you for all being here for the Power Lunch. We're really excited about this as the chairwoman. And when I was approached to be chairwoman of this organization, helping the young people get involved with this emerging ecosystem is so important. I'm a mother of two and have pretty much coerced my son to actually start pursuing it on the other side. I won't tell the story, so you might have heard that, in terms of his love for game design and been pushing him on the side of being a producer. But it's just so important to have this conversation, particularly on the Hill, as we think about the implications for what this ecosystem looks like. So I'm going to just to give you a sense of the type of advocacy work that STEM4US is actually embarking on. I'll give you 3 reasons why this particular conversation today is very important. One, and I have used this in the past several speaking engagements that I've had, we have in this country, in the tech industry, something that we suffer from, and that is called the 2% rule. Back in the days, and I'm a sociologist, some of you might actually be looking at me funny, there was something called a 2% blood drop. I call this a 2% rule because 2% of the nation's top leading tech companies, Google, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Yahoo, hired less than 2% of us. So it's a 2% rule. And that is a factor that we have to actually break if we're going to ensure that the conversation that we're going to have today is relevant. We also suffer from a second factor, which I like to share, which is the buy it, don't build it phenomena. So many African Americans and Latinos in the work that I do over-index on the use of mobile technologies and applications, but they're the first one to try it and buy it, but not build it. So we suffer from that as well. And that's an area that we have to discuss in terms of how do we get people to be less consumer-oriented and much more producer-oriented. And the third factor that I like to throw out there that we suffer from, which is the reason why this great organization was started, is we suffer from the I don't have a garage in my backyard syndrome. Fast Company a couple years ago put out an article that said that most innovation and ideas come out of our garages. And there was a backup story by a colleague of mine, or a slogan that he said, but if I live in the hood, I don't got a garage. The metaphorical garage does not exist. I'm proud to say now we actually are seeing projects in Harlem and other places like the next generation. But I was with somebody recently who said in our communities, instead of Silicon Valley, is Silicon Prairie when it comes to technology. And that, my friends, are 3 serious concerns that we need to be concerned about. The diversity and inclusion that exists that actually drives people to be part of this ecosystem, the ability to move people from consumers to producers to benefit from this ecosystem, and the conditions that are created that allow people to be much more engaged in the building of applications and new technology innovations that actually allow them to participate. And if you have a garage, metaphorically, you can also get some money because you got a car to put in that garage, which is the focus of this conversation this morning. So I put that out to you all as a context for the great people that you're going to hear today. These are distinguished panelists that will speak about this issue. And what's more exciting, the fact that we're actually having this conversation on the Hill, the engagement of the White House as well as the Small Business Administration when it comes to the types of credits and incentives that are available to move people into these economies are even greater. So we thank the Congresswoman for actually being a host of this room, and we thank all of you for being here with us as well. We'd also like to thank our sponsors, Howard University, as well as PEPCO, for actually bringing this conversation forward. And we look forward to many more of these. If you are not following our website, if you are not coming to our power lunches or know when they are outside of having a free lunch every once in a while, I encourage all of you to go to the website and to follow the great work of this organization. And as I close, and before I bring up our next guest, I want to just give you context of why it's just so significant to do this. Years ago, many of us in this room, the next best technical skill that we needed might have been manufacturing, automotive, typing, and other vocational skills. Technology and broadband have transformed the way that we live, learn, and earn. it is so imperative, and I see my buddy Tim up here. Years ago, we didn't talk about STEM. We talked about workforce preparedness, and now we're actually seeing this explosion of STEM careers and STEM innovations and the STEM economy grow. In fact, it's grown so much, I was at a conference last week and they said put the A back in STEM to make it STEAM, bring the arts back. So I say to all of you, the time is right because the legislators are ripe to actually move forward with this, but they can't move forward without your voice. So please get involved. Support this organization with your pocket and your ideas, and ensure that you follow us as we move forward. And I'd just like to recognize, are there other board members that are actually out here today? Did I see other board members? Oh, okay. Raise your hand. We're taping it. See, we do everything. I speak, he tapes. Somebody was serving food. No kidding. But like I said, we're in our infancy, but we look forward to growing. But please, please, please support us. With that, I want to actually introduce one of the sponsors or co-sponsors of this event, Dr. Gary Harris, who is here on behalf of the Howard University's interim president, who will actually, 17th president. Oh, 17th president. Name today. I was going to say, because I didn't catch that one, so let's give her a hand. That is great news. I went to Howard. I'll tell a funny story offline for like 2 weeks. I'll just leave it at that. But I did go to Howard. My dad went to Howard. And he will be followed by our host today, Phil T.K. Yin, who's not a stranger to this organization from CCT TV. So when Dr. Harris is done, Phil will come up and get us started. Thank you.
I just like to say that I'm happy beyond belief for a lot of different reasons. One of the exciting reasons is, of course, that we have a new president at Howard, formally announced today. But it's good to see that for a long time we were out there talking to ourselves. We were talking about STEM programs. We were talking about increasing our participation in engineering and the sciences, and it seemed like we were just talking to each other. And I'm so excited that there's these national efforts to get people involved in STEM. I won't say too much today, but maybe later on in the panel I'll have an opportunity to say a few words. But I just want to leave you with just one little thing to think about. And that is that we have a saying, and that saying is that students can't do what they can't imagine. So part of this process is changing people's imaginations. And once they can imagine that things can happen, there are all kinds of possibilities. So I just want to leave you with that. And I'm so happy to be here with a group of people who believe in what I believe in, and that, we've been told that there are two types of people in this world: those who make things happen and those who wake up and ask the question, what the hell just happened? So I'm happy to be with those who make things happen. So I'll leave it at that.
So without any further ado, I want to ask the host of our conversation today. Somebody was said earlier is no stranger to our organization because he's actually been a host before. He was here on, some of you all might have one of the programs from our event last year that we were talking about immigration reform. Well, I think this conversation comes directly from that, because one of the things we found was that while there is a dearth, a 2% rule that was mentioned earlier by Dr. Turner Lee, in the numbers of African American, Latinos, and women who are involved in STEM, there's actually a significant disproportionate number of Asian Americans who are involved in STEM. And while we say in our community is that we're not mad at you, we only want to be in the room as well, doing what we know what we can do, and that is contributing to the innovation that's going to bring our nation and make it a more competitive nation. And so, again, it is important, I think, when we have these conversations that we are diverse. And again, I think that nobody represents the diversity, I think, of America more than what the Chinese television network CTV is doing, both in terms of their broadcasts, as well as in terms of their content, as well as in terms of the character of the host. So without any further ado, I want to bring on my friend, and hopefully someone who's going to be your friend, Phil Ye from CTV. Let's give it up.
All right. Thank you very much. It's an honor to be invited to come back here. I really enjoyed it last time. Immigration reform obviously is a very important topic to all of us, and it hits all of us very, very differently. For some of us, we are first-generation immigrants, others second generation, others third, and so on. But no matter what you think about immigration, one thing that unites all of us is the fact that we do believe that, at least here in America, you have the opportunity to pursue something that you love without fear of reprisal or fear of being blamed, fear of failure. Because I can tell you, having traveled extensively through Europe and Asia, that people are scared to innovate. People are scared to try it out on their own, because if you fail, you will never succeed. You fail once, you won't ever try again. And that does not exist here in our four walls of America, and that's what makes America special. So thank you for having me, and I look forward to having a very good discussion with our expert panelists, because I think one thing that, again, makes America special is the fact that we can have these honest discussions and candid dialogues with each other to try to find solutions to solve some of the issues that are facing not just African Americans, not just the Hispanic group, not just women, but fairness is for everybody. We're not here just for our own particular groups. We're here because we believe in the fairness of America, that everybody should have an equal opportunity. So I do look forward to having that conversation and hopefully learning more about these issues from our experts. Without further ado, I want to introduce somebody very important, Daryl Gorman, from the Director of Office, Boards and Commissions of the D.C. Mayor's Office. If you come up and say a few words, please.
I wanted to focus everyone on the fact that in the District of Columbia, we're making strenuous efforts to get involved in innovation and technology in a way that we have never done so in the past. We have two new appointments, Philip Reeves in the Department of Small and Local Business Development, who focuses a tremendous amount of attention on the Small Business Innovation Research Program and the Small Business Technology Transfer Program. Is everybody here familiar with those programs?
Those are good, man.
Billions of federal dollars are expended each year in the federal science, research and development agencies, just in those two programs alone. If you look at what the federal government spends, and I always say the federal government created the economies that are successful pretty much everywhere in the United States, SBIR and STTR are two programs that minorities and women should really focus on. I think that the federal agencies, and especially working through HBCUs, have been for a long time trying to get more women and minorities involved in SBIR and STTR. But in the district government, Philip Reeves is focused on that. So if you're located in DC, you should be talking to Philip Reeves. You should also be talking to Aaron McKinney, who's in the Deputy Mayor for Planning and Economic Development Office, who also is focused on innovation. And what we're trying to do is put together everything that's going on in DC and make it a cohesive activity so that it's something that you can not only identify, but something that you can participate in. On June 11th, I put together a new mayor's order, the District of Columbia Innovation and Technology Inclusion Council. And we're taking the universities in DC as well as innovators and putting together a 15 to 25 person council, which will focus on understanding where we are in terms of our competitiveness with Maryland and Virginia and other states, and also seeing what we can do to really jumpstart innovation activity in the District of Columbia. We've been very much involved in construction as an economic development activity, $7.5 billion of construction activity in DC in the Mayor Gray administration in the last few years. But we recognize the fact that workforce training, workforce development, and innovation and technology inclusion are very important to how we move forward in the next few years. So technology inclusion is just as much a part of innovation in terms of where we're going. And if you're interested in finding out more about it, please feel free to contact me. My number is 202-727-1372, and it's Darryl.Gorman@dc.gov, DARRYL.GORMAN@dc.gov. I'm not going to take up more time at this point because we have other panelists, but that's something I want to point out to you right now.
Okay, first of all, thank you. Another very important individual I want to introduce, Nagesh Rao. He's the Senior Policy Advisor, Office of Investment and Innovation at the Small Business Administration, and Office of Investment and Innovation. It's an extensive title, but it's certainly a very important job. If you could tell us a little bit about your role.
Thank you. Phil Reeves is a great guy. I know Phil, and so coincidentally, I actually help oversee the programmatic and policy oversight of the SBIR STTR program across all 11 federal agencies. That is what SBA's job is. So as indicated, I'm not only the Senior Policy Advisor, I'm also their entrepreneur in resident. And I moved back to DC a year ago and 1 month, 13 months ago, from Oakland, California. So I understand very well, having lived in Oakland for the past time before moving here. I used to live here, and then I lived in Oakland, and I get it. I understand the technology gap. I understand the minority gap loud and clear, having lived in it and worked with my friends in the space. Before I go into the SBA thing a little bit, I want to kind of highlight something Nicole had mentioned that was interesting about STEM, because I think there's something to understand from the STEM perspective, because there's been a talk about including the A for arts. And so I'm going to just showcase why that's important to understand that distinction. This is the product of STEM. This is STEM. This is the product of STEAM. It's the same darn device. There's no significant difference between the BlackBerry and the iPhone. What it is it's the aesthetics, the design play, the human interface play. That's what the arts bring. The arts evoke emotion. And that emotional play that makes you go, I want to play with this. I feel like this is part of me. I'm sure you've been on the subway, you've had your phone with you, you might lose it. All of a sudden, it's like your additional limb to your body, right? Like it's an extension of who you are. It's that nice mix between the physical and the emotional play of a device, because it has so much information. So something I wanted to point out to folks as you're thinking about these issues and trying to make your cohesive arguments going forward about why we want to talk about STEM versus STEAM, or going about STEAM and why it's important. This is a very simple analogy to play off. You can always get STEM, but STEAM is what sells. Now, I am the son of immigrant entrepreneurs, and I'm proud of that. And what's really interesting, I want to go into a story a little bit before I go into everything we do at SBA, because it's quite frankly a little bit more interesting and entertaining than what we do at SBA. No, SBA is great though. No, it's good. I've had a fun 10 months so far. As I say, son of immigrant entrepreneurs, and I'm proud of it because my mom, when she came here with my dad, she only has an 8th grade education. Barely could speak English. My dad was a little bit more educated, but they both come from the farm country, rural backcountry of India, like really rural backcountry. And my dad got lucky, they both came from big families, and my dad climbed up, got himself a scholarship of the sort in India to go to med school and go for it. And my mom, when she met my dad, it worked out really well. And she had my 2 older sisters, and then she had me and my younger sister here in the States. But when she came to the country to meet up with my dad with my 2 older sisters, she didn't know much English, but she persevered through. My dad helped her make sure she understood English and get trained in all that stuff. But what was really interesting was when we were growing up, and so all four of us are growing up, and my mom and dad are having the discussion about, my two older sisters about post-high school. What do we do? Because in India, especially from the backcountry, women education was not a big priority. My mom said, I will be darned if, a little bit more explicitive, but I will be darned if my daughters do not get equal access to resources and information. So my mom made it clear they were going to go to college. And then my mom made it clear they were going to go to grad school. And it was very clear also with my younger sister, college, grad school. There was, you had to meet a certain level. And so my mom had made it very clear to my two older sisters, one's got a master's in comp sci, the second one's got a PhD in engineering, the younger one's a medical doctor, and she made it very clear with all three of my siblings, sisters, that they needed to be equals to their husbands whenever they found their matches. And they did. They actually found husbands of equal caliber, and that was what my mom wanted to make it clear. And the reason why I say that for a moment is because it starts at the family. It starts at the house. It starts with parents who say, you are going to be better than what I am, because you are an extension of my legacy. You're an extension of our progeny, and so we need to instill that nature. We need to instill that culture. We need to instill that behavior going forward across the board. And so that's one of the biggest pushes I want to advocate on. From the SBA's angle, getting into the boring stuff. So in our office, we have three different suites. We have the SBIC portfolio, which is the debt leverage venture capital program, and we have programs that relate to early stage investing, the early stage innovation fund, and then the traditional debt leverage program. And essentially what it is it is a program designed to help venture capitalists who wish to invest in a specific series of projects. They can leverage dollars from us and basically capitalize on that. So if they have a $5 million fund, they can get from us extensively another $5 to $10 million, and it's a low interest payment. They have to pay it back with the low interest, but the whole idea is that you as the fund now have more money to play with to leverage on when making your investments. That's traditionally geared towards the venture capital markets. The SBIR STTR program, I'll touch on in a second. We have the innovation portfolio, and that deals with issues around policy and programmatic oversight on crowdfunding, which you all know about from the U.S. Jobs Act, and that's becoming a big deal. So SEC and Treasury have asked us to take a leading role on addressing those issues, so we've been helping out from a policy oversight on that front. SEC is still the lead, but we are providing input because crowdfunding's tangible factor is going to be towards small businesses. So as the Small Business Administration, it makes sense for us to provide serious input. And then we have Accelerator platform, and the Accelerator program, which is going on right now, is designed to help innovation accelerator models that can help technology companies scale up a little bit more. And so we have a competition going on, $2.5 million competition in 50,000 grants. And the whole idea is to be able to take that money and then use it to scale up your operations. Traditional accelerators we're talking about include Techstars, Rock Health, Greentown Labs, and those folks. And it's that combination of co-share and workspace environment, the human capital, the intellectual capital, the social capital tied in together to help accelerate and levitate that company forward in that shared resource format. The last thing is the SBIR STTR program, which is near and dear to my heart. And the SBIR program is probably what I would call America's angel fund. That is a $2.5 billion program divvied across 11 federal agencies, and it is geared towards disruptive, high-risk technology innovation development. Companies that have graduated from SBIR program have included Qualcomm, Symantec, Genentech, Biogen, Ecovative Design. I can go on and on, Lyft Labs. And it tends to be much more cutting-edge technologies. And so one of the things you should think about as a community is that if you're going to encourage entrepreneurship, especially high-tech growth entrepreneurship, you want to think about how you can leverage the SBIR STTR funding towards the research, because it's towards R&D at the federal need. Now, what's interesting about this is that it's non-dilutive funding. What does that mean? It means you don't have to pay it back. It's a grant. It's a contract. You keep it. You just got to show some results with it, and you got to be honest with the paperwork, but you get to keep it. And a phase one grant, I would say, is equivalent to those who are familiar with the venture capital world. A phase one grant's $150K, and that's like a angel investment. A phase two grant's about up to $1.5 million. That's like a Series A round, but you get to keep it as long as you produce results. The phase one grant's usually for figuring out the prototype. Phase 2 is scaling up the prototype for growth. And then Phase 3 is where the government buys it. They want to buy it in mass bulk or other sorts. A great example of federal funded research that has pivoted towards consumer needs is iRobot, because iRobot created the Roomba vacuum cleaner, but it started off as technology for mine detection, for bombs. And the entrepreneur, the company figured out a dual use pivot and said, look, the sensing technology that's used for mine detection could be used to pick up dirt. So we will make a vacuum cleaner with it. The Roomba vacuum cleaner at every Bed Bath & Beyond you go to. Now, it's not only companies that come out of SBIR, as I've been realizing, and I've been involved in SBIR program for about 10 years now. I would say about 10, 12 years since my early days at RPI for Tech Transfer Office when I was working there. And I've worked with a bunch of startups and out in the Valley in New York, helped some out in Kentucky and a few others, so as an advisor or consultant sort of thing. And I will say one of the coolest things I found out about SBIR is that industry trends also results from that program. Everyone knows about 3D printing, right? It's on everyone's mind, 3D printing is going to bring back manufacturing here in the U.S. It's got a great shot at it. Give it another 5, 10 years at least of nanotech development, and we'll get there. That's a result of SBIR funding. 3D printing is a result of federal funded research from DARPA and NASA and NSF, but what was critical was NSF's SBIR program back in the early 90s, 94. They said, look, this is great technology we've developed for the U.S. government and the military needs, but is there a commercial play for the mainstream? And so they put some grant funding out, and some of the main companies like DTM, Z-Core, and whatnot got those grants back in 94. They developed the technology, and this is 94, and it's now come to fruition in 2014. That technology, that underlying portfolio, Z-Core got bought out by 3D Systems. It is now what makes 3D Systems run. 3D Systems being one of the biggest 3D printer companies in the game. Autodesk, all those guys have that stuff. And so I guess the point I'm making is that when you're thinking about the technology you're going to develop and looking at the funding mechanisms you want to utilize, you want to look at the whole suite of services. And at SBA's OII, we make it a big deal to make sure everyone knows about that. Now, it is a priority for us to make sure that the minority and socially disadvantaged and underrepresented communities are addressed. And believe me, we're doing it. And we've got webinars, we have outreach, we are working with various communities and stakeholders. I know I've been in conversations now with the National Society of Black Engineers. We're really going out there and making sure it's a priority. We don't want the 2% rule. It shouldn't be the 2% rule. It should be the 100% rule. The whole point is that equal access and equal opportunity to all this stuff, and that's the biggest point of the game. I know I got to wrap it up, but the biggest thing that we could use is more input, more understanding of what resources are out there. That's one of the key roles here in federal government, is to identify and then educate the masses. And so when we locate a resource, we say, look, take a look over here. For example, state of Kentucky does matching for SBIR program. That's a great thing. And so we want to make sure other states understand that model and go, look, if the state of Kentucky is matching an SBIR grant with their own state funding, why aren't we doing that? Maybe we should do that. If we can't match it because the budget's too tight, what can we give in return? If we can't give matching dollars, could we give an office space? Could we give resources? Could we say, look, co-located with a top-tier R&D university in our state, like Iowa State, can we use the facilities at Iowa State to help cultivate that company forward in that region, using the local resources to really scale you up in the right direction? You want to make this sustainable, and you want to make this locally driven. You don't want to be chasing sexy. It's the biggest thing I want to tell people is don't chase sexy. Everyone's been chasing apps. Someone coming out of Silicon Valley, I'll tell you, apps are done. We're done. That's been done. It's been done for a few years now. It's hardware. Chase hardware. But more importantly, chase what works well in your local innovation ecosystem. Chase what works well with your community. Use your resources. You got your intellectual capital, you got your political capital, you got your technical capital. Use those resources to really scale this up and get your things going. And think about the public-private partnership models. There are a ton of programs I could go on and on about, but the most important thing is finding out what are the right resources for you and tapping into those right resources and playing it smart and playing it effective. I mean, I've had my shares of wins and losses as an entrepreneur so far, and I'm looking forward to my next startup in the next year. But I will tell you, like, there are some great programs. Take advantage of it. It is laborious. It is bureaucratic for good reason. It's American tax dollars, so it's got to be a little bit bureaucratic. But it's a great resource. There's a set of resources, and I'm happy to answer any questions If not now, later on, my email is nagesh.rao@sba.gov, nagesh.rao@sba.gov. And thank you.
Now, just for the record, you're able to stay for a few minutes for our panel discussion, right?
Not for the panel, but because I got to.
All right, then we're gonna grill you now.
Go ahead.
Okay. First question is, you gave out your email. That's great. Where can people go? Is it like on the site? Where can they go if they want to just learn more about this on their own?
Yes, sbir.gov. Good question. sbir.gov. sbir.gov. That's sbir.gov. That's the first place. And then the other place, of course, is sba.gov. Those are two logical websites right off the bat. And then there's another organization I would encourage you to take a look at because they do a lot of great content around SBIR, CTR, and commercialization of technology, and that's NCET2, NCET2.org. That's the National Council of Entrepreneurial Tech Transfer. And that would be a great resource.
All right.
Folks, you're local, by the way, connect with Harvey Barron over at HU, Howard. He's the Dean of the Business School. He's a great guy. He was one of the members of the National Advisory Council on Innovation and Entrepreneurship. He's good.
All right. It's always good to have smart people help us out. The other question for you was, these grants, this venture capital, the stage 1, stage 2. I mean, that's all great. And the question was brought up: are you able to dictate where that money actually goes to in terms of ensuring that it's invested in a diversified pool?
Can I dovetail on that? Because you specifically said that you guys are funding venture capital funds, right?
For the SBIC part, yes.
And if, based upon Dr. Turner Lee's analysis, if venture capital funds are only investing 2% of their monies in African American owned and Latino owned businesses, and I think slightly better, I think about 5% in women owned businesses, then should not the role of the government be to make sure that money is invested hopefully in a colorblind way, where you have at least a disproportional amount, or not disproportional, but a proportional amount of that money going to populations based upon their population in the United States?
So so SBIC is not in my complete wheelhouse, but I would say this. It all depends on who's applying for the license from SBIC. So we would need to encourage, and we do encourage and do advocate that these funds that are applying for the license hit these certain metrics and criterion. With that said, I would say probably lies along the lines of impact investing and early stage innovation funds that could play a role in this. But from the traditional debt leverage fund, I think there's ways to look at it, and I think there are ways, but we would need this is not the best answer, and part of this is because it's, like I said, it's not my wheelhouse, but there are probably ways we could see what we could do to help make sure that it is done better.
So as a follow-up, what do you think, what about, for example, Howard University and other, institutions that publish who have some, resources, came up with a fund itself specifically targeted to make sure that, African American and women-owned venture capital opportunities are going to technology startups, for example.
Yeah.
Would that be something that the SBA would be able to get behind?
I think so. I mean, because that would make sense, because that's debt leverage funding, and we're trying to actually figure out ways to map together the SBIR and the SBIC plays, and so that would make sense from if the university came up with the fund, partnering up with the fund group, and you have to have experienced investors in the pool. It can't just be anyone applies for it. You have to be an experienced investor. That's part of the litmus test. And so if it's an experienced accredited investors who know what they're doing with the investing and show a portfolio that shows where the risk is and where the risk is mitigated and all that stuff, then why not? But that's part of it, is that the funds that apply for the license, and we want to it's not just you can go and you get it. You have to show economic justification, you have to show a profile, and you have to show a logical play of what the forecasting would be. Because it's real dollars in play. You can't just take money and then throw it around.
Translation, a lot of paperwork.
Exactly.
All right. We're going to get to that in a bit. Let me get to the panel discussion, stay on time, then we have to move some chairs here. Let me reintroduce Dr. Gary Harris from Howard University. He'll be on our panel. And then, Nagesh, thank you very much.
Oh, yeah.
Excellent.
Did you have a question for me? It's the last one, and then.
Look,
Just a quick point, the A in STEAM is for arts.
Correct.
That's not for cell phone case, that's for drawing, painting, writing, singing, dancing. I've successfully made the point to the judiciary that there is a different copyright that applies to technology than
Correct.
it does to the arts. So it's very important to clarify that the A in STEAM is for the arts.
Correct, and I don't disagree with that position. What I do want to hint, though, is that it's a source for inspiration. Remember, Steve Jobs' inspiration around this was calligraphy in Japan and the arts of Japan. That's an art. He was learning the art of writing, and it was that aesthetic design that inspired him to say, how do I take this and translate this to human evocation?
Well, it raises another point to address. The taking is a big problem with technology. It takes the arts, the intellectual property, and the ability for anybody that's got a creative child to make a living. So we need to find a balance.
Sure, I don't disagree with that at all.
all right, good. We agree. We agree. Nagesh, thank you very much for your time. We do certainly appreciate it.
Thank you.
And we'll be in touch otherwise. And I'll introduce our other very patient panelists who have been waiting here. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, if I get any pronunciations of your name. But this is from my notes. Dr. Robert Bonner, Managing Director, All-Star Code, there at the very end. Thank you very much. It's good to see you, sir. Lisa Foreman, Founder, CEO, Women's Society of Cyber Jutsu. Jitsu. There is a typo in here. It is my apologies. Cyber Jitsu, thank you very much. Look forward to hearing your thoughts. Tim Robinson, Senior Policy Counsel, Legislative Director for Congressman Bobby Rush. Thank you very much. Good to see you. And of course, Dr. Harris, you now know. And Daryl Gorman, Director of Office Boards, Commissions, DC Mayor's Office. So there's a lot of ideas that have been tossed around, and I thought about this in terms of the panel itself. Where do we begin with this problem? I'm going to start with the assumption we all agree on the problem, so we're not going to belabor the problem itself. I think we agree that there is an issue. There's a lack of diversity. We brought up Google, the 2%. What's interesting about the 2%, 2% of the employees are actually 2 or 3% of the employees. What percentage of those are actually in management? I'd be nervous that it might be a 0. But that's interesting if you take that one step further. In any case, let me start with Robert Bonner. All-Star Code, you're helping teenagers learn and excel, and you're instilling in them why this is important. I'm going to give you the floor for just a minute to tell me a little bit about your program and some of the challenges that you face with that generation.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for having All-Star Code here to participate in this very important conversation and this discussion. Again, my name is Robert Bonner. I'm the Managing Director of All-Star Code. Just briefly, All-Star Code is a new nonprofit organization that's sole function is to bridge the opportunity gap between young men of color between the ages of 14 and 17 and the tech industry. More specifically, what we do is we provide awareness and interest workshops for these young men of color in high schools to expose them to coding, to programming, to computer science more generally. We expose them to entrepreneurial skills, business soft skills. We connect them with mentors. We also provide them with industry exposure. So all of our workshops take place at Google, Spotify, General Assembly, all of the major tech organizations in New York City. We are based in New York City, in Silicon Alley, to be more precise. And so eventually, with these awareness and interest workshops that we conduct for these young men, we encourage all of them to apply to a 6-week intensive summer program, which is taking place now, which basically takes all of the components of our pieces for our workshop and it extends them and it compresses them during that 6-week period of time, so that at the end of it, our young men come out knowing how to code. They know the difference between CSS, HTML, JavaScript, Python, Ruby on Rails, the whole 9 yards. They also know how to build platforms using that. And while doing that, they connect with industry and tech professionals in order to sort of build relationships. So fundamentally what we do, just to sort of square the circle with what everyone has said so far, is that All-Star Code is fundamentally committed to building an ecosystem of education and access for these young men, starting from ages 14, seeing them through until they get their first tech job. That's a big responsibility. And so what we have encountered, and during the question and answer period, I'll sort of talk a little bit more about what All-Star Code does programmatically. What the challenges that we faced are building that ecosystem of access and education. And that some of the components of that have been raising awareness among young men that coding, technology, STEM in the high school years is something that they should be interested in. I mean, as obviously most of you know, the stats on the number of African Americans who take computer science courses and then take the AP course are pretty dire. And what we found is that there's a general sense that STEM and computer science are not very interesting. They're boring. It's not for me. What we've done is we've gamified the learning of STEM, of computer science. So what does that mean? If you ask a room full of 100 young men of color if they play video games, all but one will raise his hand. And the one that doesn't raise his hand is because his machine is broken. And so basically what we do is we say this is the path for you not only to learn how to build video games that you play, but you can also build the business behind the video games that you play so that you can enjoy building something. You can learn technically that skill. You can also learn how to build the business around it so that you can gain money from that as well. And the way in which we build in exercises that encourage them to be inspired by it and to learn the computer science technology behind it has been very inspirational. The other challenge that we face is with parents who perceive technology as something that's arm's length and that's sort of this impersonal product that they should consume, and they don't know very much about sort of the tech industry at large and how one gains access to the tech industry. So what we've also done is created a parenting information piece where we explain not only how the tech ecosystem works, how to get a job in that tech ecosystem, but we also explain the amount of money that your child can earn if they are serious about becoming a programmer or an entrepreneur. And obviously, many of you know that the tech industry, I think it enjoys, programming more specifically, enjoys an unemployment rate of about 4%. And the average starting salary is $75,000 a year.
It's amazing.
Yes, and so as a result of that, parents are seeing not only that this is a viable opportunity for their sons, but they're also seeing that we will provide the pathway to helping their sons get there. There are a whole host of other sort of challenges that we face if you're talking about the ecosystem building with respect to enough tech professionals of color to be a part of it, in terms of industries who want to have us expose our kids to them, but that's a topic for another.
No, look, it's something that's been discussed many times before in the past, and I'm sure you guys would agree that if you want more people of color to be in certain positions, it's good to have them as managers too. They need to be the people making those hiring decisions. We'll stop there. We'll come back to you. Excellent work, by the way, what you do, and thank you. Now, after these kids make it through high school, assuming they do make it past your courses, they'll go to college, potentially Harvard University. Dr. Harris, I wanted to ask you, these kids, when they get to school, let's say he successfully encourages people to be interested in this field. How does a university, not just yours, but universities around this country, big and small, technical, non-technical, 2-year and 4-year degrees, what's the best program for them to ensure that that enthusiasm continues on, at least until the day they graduate?
that's a big question to answer, but I'll try my best. Let me just say that one of the things that I think is really important is that we constantly expose kids to all kinds of environments. Part of the issue in particular for students of color is the exposure question. They don't know what the possibilities are. So, I think you also have to give them more hands-on kinds of experiences. We're in a fortunate situation now. For $35, you can go out and buy Raspberry Pi, a computer, and or you can buy an Arduino board, and you can control all kinds of different things. So I think that has changed the playing field, and it will give a lot of students, once they get exposed to that, some opportunity to do a lot of hands-on kinds of things. We also have to give them an environment or create an environment where they view themselves not just as users of technology, but also as people who can create the technology. And the way you do that is you have things like we're building a new Howard Innovation Lab on campus where students can actually pursue their own ideas and fool around with without the risk of how to be a company. And they have maker space where they can explore, some of their ideas. So I think we also have to have opportunities for them to do real research in the summer. So we have a number of research experiences for undergraduates program where actual undergraduates get an opportunity to work alongside of top researchers and graduate students and solve real research-related problems. And most of them really, really enjoy that. And some of them get paid and activities like that. And another thing that you should also think about is exposing teachers. That's one way to get a lot of bang for your buck. So just last week, we had 72 teachers from D.C., Virginia, and Prince George's County, where they actually took a week's course on materials, and they got in the lab, and they actually worked with a whole bunch of different materials. They also worked in the clean room. They fabricated some basic Schottky diodes. And so I think through experiences like that, where you can expose teachers, they can inspire. And if you talk to most scientists or most people who pursued this as a career, there is this one incident in their life that many of them can go back to and say where somebody made a difference. I can only speak of myself. I had a business in high school. Back a long time ago, they had something called vacuum tubes. And I don't know if you guys know anything about that or not, but that was the predecessor to the transistor. And I had an opportunity. I had a business in high school where I would fix televisions. First, I started out with the family, and then the business just grew and grew. And it's a funny story because I didn't even have a tube tester. I had to go to the local drugstore and test my tubes. And I had an agreement with them that if they let me use their tube tester, I would buy my tubes there when I needed to replace them. But it was a very lucrative business for me. In fact, it allowed me to buy a color TV. And it was a big thing in my neighborhood because we were one of the few black families that had a color TV. And in fact, on Sunday, all of our relatives and a lot of our neighbors would come by our house so we could watch two shows, Bonanza and the Lawrence Welk Show. And those were two of the few shows that came on in color. So I think, the whole question is about exposure and giving our kids opportunities. And whenever we can do that, we're going to have positive results. You can do it through teachers. You can do it through summer camps. You can do it through tours. You can do it through teaching them new technology, learning code. So there's really a lot of options out there that you can pursue that will help students really get excited about this technology.
All right, so we're going to get to you in just a moment. Let's assume the kids make it through your program, they make it through your program, and they're interested. So we're going to talk about the role of government. I want to bring in Timothy Robinson, Senior Policy Counsel for Congressman Rush. You know, two of the major, we're in the midterm elections right now. Income inequality is a big one. The wage gap issue is a big one. And somehow I think everything is going to be somewhat related at some point. When you guys think about policy up there on Capitol Hill or here on Capitol Hill, what does legislation look like? Can we legislate our way? And I've seen some of the proposals already, but what's realistic? I mean, there's a lot of great ideas, but once you come up with a great idea, the other side shoots it down and so on. So we keep going this back and forth. What's a realistic solution that Congress could agree on that would help address these issues?
It's a good question. And I think we have to start with coming to consensus that there is a problem before we can craft solutions. Depending upon the constituency that you represent, the district or state that you come from, what your citizens and voters' needs are, that's going to color your perception of the problem. My boss, Congressman Bobby Rush, would see this as being a very severe problem that's created massive disparities in how families feed themselves and how they make some basic choices and decisions on going about educating their children. There may not be, there may be other congressmen and women, and I know this for sure, that may not share that perception that the disparities are as stark and as unfair and unjust as Congressman Rush or I might view it. Coming to that conclusion, that there will be a disagreement as to whether there is a problem, what is the gravity of the problem, I think it's fair to say that government can act as a referee of sorts to identify where the market has failed. Government traditionally has not wanted to act as a decider, one that picks one technology or can intervene in making decisions as to where capital gets distributed. To a question that Talib raised earlier, you know, looking at the 2% problem, could government conceivably step in and try to discipline venture capital firms and other asset management firms to be more equitable in the distribution of their investments? So I think that seeing that there is going to be some disagreement as to this issue of the 2%, whether funds are being equitably distributed amongst businesses that have been founded and are being operated by all ethnic groups, that really becomes the exercise.
I mean, isn't there another issue as well? Because if you've got the big income gap and you've got the big wealth gap, we know for a fact that technology costs money. So you need to send your kids to these schools or training camps. I mean, you got to be able to afford to learn some of this stuff. It doesn't just fall out of the sky. So if the wage gap gets worse, or the wealth gap gets worse, or the inequality gap gets worse, that's all actually negative for what we're all trying to achieve.
I mean, let's be frank. The government can't even agree on whether or not a minimum wage of $10.10 is adequate. So, not to push back on the question so much as to say that.
But it has
I
an
think-
impact.
Well, government certainly does have an impact, and I think most legislators, if they're going to be honest with themselves, they have to acknowledge that there are some groups, some demographics that are going to have a much harder go of it moving on into the future. If we look at employment trends, economic trends going forward, African Americans in particular are at a very critical juncture, and I think some of the challenges that had been articulated earlier by the gentleman at the far right as to some of the techniques and strategies that they are currently employing to try to engage the interest of young African American students. Those are very laudable initiatives that are taking place. It's very distressing to me when I look at statistics that show, in 12 states, African American high school students didn't take the computer science AP exam. More certainly needs to be done to close that gap.
Okay, I think we would agree with you. And I want to bring in Lisa. You play a couple different roles, but you're our woman on the panel, so that's a special role in itself. I'm gonna let you talk a little bit about your organization, and I also wanted to talk about, there's been a lot of discussion about pay, and women today still make less than men for the same jobs, widely reported in various media groups. And I'm wondering, how does that compare when you talk about technology firms?
Interesting. We have this discussion all the time. And to be honest, those of us in cyber don't necessarily see those differences in cybersecurity. Now, granted, we are pocketed in the IT arena. There are differences there, but it's I want to say subjective. I don't have stats to back that, but we're in the trenches. Our organization is in the trenches. I'm a working cybersecurity professional. I know my pay is equivalent to my counterparts. I think we're looking more at the entry level and career changers that are seeing these, these deficiencies in pay. But I did want to spin off of what Gary was saying. I had to say this. It is a key. You mentioned what can higher education facilities do to keep the interests of students. And it's great that you guys are doing this as far as the hands-on, the labs, because what we find is that the universities do not have the capacity or the know-how to engage not just women, which we address, but those areas of computer science. It's scary. I even changed my degree initially from CS to IT because I was scared. In hindsight, I wish I didn't. So our organization, Women's Society of Cyber Jitsu, we're a nonprofit, Northern Virginia based, but we are virtually national, if you will. We address and help, help women advance in cybersecurity. So we do anything and everything we can to help women. We're a community. We have workshops, we have mentoring, we have job placement assistance. And we cannot move forward without addressing the girls. It's almost, we have to. Why? Because why are we where we're at now? women have all these barriers to entry and advancement, including the perception that girls have of IT and computer science.
Which is?
Well, the societal views of the geek in the basement with the glasses. That's our favorite. That is not true, trust me.
I sat in Davos. Sitting next to me having breakfast was Marissa Mayer of Yahoo, and she was definitely not a geek.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know. I mean, do you think that perception has changed? I mean, the geek aspect. I mean, I hate to use that word, by the way, but
Well, we're proud to call ourselves geeks.
but has that perception changed? You know, not just with women, but all groups in general. Is technology cool?
It's getting there, but yeah, I'm looking at Kathy. She's like shaking her head no. Just like any major societal issue, you know, slavery, gays, it's going to take time for something like this to change, you know, worldwide. We're doing our little part, and everyone else needs to do their little part. Robert's group, awesome, you know, even though it's pertaining to boys. But still, we need to do our little parts and commune to make the bigger effort come to fruition, right? So, you know, we're doing our little part, and we're seeing the girls go through our program, and we're doing exposure with the hands-on STEM-based workshops for girls. We have the women's side, exposing women to different topics in cybersecurity, and our ultimate goal is to fill that 12% of women in cybersecurity stat to maybe 50%, right? So,
Or more?
Or more, yeah.
Let me give you an interesting statistic from the NYU Stern Business School. So, 2% of $1.8 billion companies are raising and so on. 2% of roughly $2 billion go to who? Women.
Oh, wait.
When you talk about entrepreneurship and startup. And that's where I want to bring you in to talk a little bit about it, because we were chatting about this. Research, entrepreneurship, I think it's cool. I think you think it's cool. How do we bring all this together? How do we get these ideas that they're talking about to the kids, to get them excited to continue on their journey? Because I don't think that we have found a solution. I mean, there's some great ideas, and you guys have a lot of passion about this, and that's important. But maybe you can help us tie it together.
Hopefully. I was a program manager at the National Science Foundation for a long time, and there's quite a distinction in people's minds about the coolness of researchers as opposed to the coolness of entrepreneurs. In 2014, entrepreneurship is definitely cool, and R&D entrepreneurship is super cool. So there's no problem with showing a young person that there's value in terms of the money they can make or the friends that they can have and the social environment that they can be in. When they do tech meetups in DC, they have 1,000 people show up. Whether or not everybody knows that something like that exists, in some sense, doesn't even matter, because the people who are there know that it exists. It's a way to meet other people. It's a way to get your business connected with other people. I think the biggest question I have for how this all fits together, which I think is what people sitting in the audience really want to see as well, is how do we connect the young people all the way down to pre-K with those who are in the workforce, so that there's a connection that they can see. There are programs that can take young people who don't have 5th grade skills and bridge those skills to 8th grade skills in 7.5 weeks. They can bridge them to junior college in another 7.5 weeks. We could take young people and move them all the way up to being able to get to a junior college or an entry-level position very quickly if the funding was just put into that, which in this particular case, it's not an expensive program. But once people get there, how do they know how to navigate the system is really, I think, the question that everybody who's 18, 24, 30, 50, 75 years old, whoever, however old you are and you want to be involved in this, how do you actually do that? And I think that's where we really haven't demonstrated value to a lot of adults who really want to be involved in this. If you talk to people and get a good mentor, you have moved one step ahead. If you figure out what an agency is actually looking for that's going to fund you, you have moved one step ahead. If you know venture capitalists, you have moved one step ahead. If you know people in a bank who will loan you money, you have moved one step ahead. Because at the end of the day, you can't always have the value. If you invested in a house, maybe the value went down. I mean, these are things that happen to people in real life. If you were working on a job, maybe you're not working on that job anymore. Wall Street Journal recently reported that the Small Business Administration was making fewer loans to black entrepreneurs than to any other group. From 2008, when there was a decline for everybody up until now, most other groups have gone back up, but black entrepreneurs have not. I don't know what the statistic was for women entrepreneurs, but I think that from the political end, there's a need to move forward with federal agencies in what they're doing. But from a personal point of view, I want everyone to really think about how do you navigate and how do you figure out where you need to move, because there's 1,000 directions you could move in. The problem with information and connections and networking is that you get too many opportunities to move, and you really have to figure out what really makes sense. And I think that everybody here probably has some suggestion that they could give on what you, as an adult looking to move forward, should do right now to get where you need to go.
Yeah, I almost feel like, we need to put all those kids in one big room and put you guys in front of them. That's what we need to do. How are we on time? Hurry up? Okay. Do we have time for a couple questions? Okay, let's do a couple quick questions, a couple quick answers, please, and then let's take it from there. Let's start with the young lady on the far right.
Hi, my name is Susan Banks, and I'm the founder and director of the Mind Bloom Preschool, which is a Mandarin, Chinese, and Spanish preschool in Washington, D.C. for children ages 2 to 5. And I got a very, very exciting surprise, full of wonder yesterday when I saw my little 2-year-old using microscopes for the first time in my program. This week is Ecology Week. I pick a different week, a different theme every week for these kids, and we have a science-based curriculum. No one seems to remember Macmillan Science but me. But there's this green box of materials that is like the Bible to my program. And when I talk to parents, I engage, my program is new, I engage parents, I would say maybe 3 to 5 parents a week for interest in my program. We just opened, and I tell them about this wonderful science-based curriculum that we have, which branches out into other areas like history, math, reading, and so forth. But I'm wondering, with all the talk about investing in the youth, what is being done to invest in pre-K education for this? Because every time I try to reach out to DC government for funding and other things, it's like people don't know what I'm talking about. I have 3 heads, and I don't get any of the funding.
So pre-K investment, who wants to tackle this one? A volunteer, please.
I can't speak for DC Public Schools or the Public Charter School Board, but I can talk to you about it offline because it is a much longer conversation than what we could offer in the next couple of minutes. So I'll be happy to discuss it with you.
Okay, ma'am, please.
Do we have anybody else from SBA here? Anybody? Anybody? They're supporting that. I just want you to know, I'm Montessori International pre-K, because I know they're supporting it. I see tons of money going into Detroit for just the thing that you're talking about. So if you go to their website and just Google, not Google, but search on that. I'm sure tons of information will come up on that.
Did you have a question?
I did.
Please.
Okay. I'd like to address it to you. You're New York City based. What are the requirements for young boys to get into your program?
So there are two components of the program. One is sort of our awareness and interest workshop, awareness and trial. It takes place on Saturdays. It's an all-day workshop. It's called Design a Startup in a Day, which teaches them how to wireframe and they structure their own business. So the requirements are that they be interested and that they commit to showing up. So those are the sort of two requirements for that. For the actual 6-week intensive summer program, there are a whole host of other sort of requirements, but none of which are a hurdle that most boys can't sort of supersede. They have to have a solid academic background.
What is solid?
Solid is sort of B minus or so, but it's not solely based on grades. It's based on your response to a series of essay questions, which try to get at your interest in coding, technology, math and science. Also, we tried to look for grit or perseverance, and also your comfort with ambiguity, because you're going to be placed in a lot of situations where you're building networks, relationships, going into new industries, new offices, and you're going to have to be in situations where you haven't been before. So how do you deal with that level of ambiguity?
I think that would scare most adults, including myself.
Well, and the truth of the matter is that the kids don't have to be professionals at any of these things. They just have to be able to recognize with a certain degree of self-reflection that this is a challenge for them and that it exists. And so we actually provide them with the skills for that. So I think the requirements are not large, but for the summer program, but there is an essay sort of component to it that the boys have to commit to writing.
Last question. Maybe two more. Can we do two more? Okay, he says yes. We'll go with you, and then we'll go with you. Please go ahead, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Cheryl Taylor, and I'm an attorney and a writer. And I'm one of those clueless parents about STEM. I have happen, of course, as it works out that way, two boys who are really gifted in that area. But I want to know, are there any programs like yours in this area where we are in Washington, D.C.? Because I've been looking everywhere for my kids. And one of them, he was the captain of the science bowl team for 2 years, 7th and 8th grade. And there weren't any women at all on the team until the second year when the girls saw him. They're like, okay, he's doing it, we're going to come.
So what's the age group? What's the age group?
Are there any programs like Mr. Bonner's in this area, like All-Star Coach?
Where do you live?
Of 16, 17-year-old or younger?
Actually for middle schoolers.
Where do you live?
I live in Bowie.
Can I first say, you can go to STEM4US.org and you can see a whole list of programs for your child of that age as well as younger and older. But I think STEM4US.org. Exactly.
There are programs by NSBE, the National Society of Black Engineers. They have camps at Howard. We run at least more camps than I can count on various issues, exposure to code writing. We also have a couple of female faculty, women, who concentrate primarily on women. As part of our, we have a science and math school that's connected with the university. And we, through the sponsorship of Google, sponsored one of the first code writing courses for 7th graders, 5th, 6th, and 7th graders, where they actually got exposed to high-level codes, writing code. So there are lots of programs around. The Boy Scouts, we do things with them. They had a project last year where they built Raspberry Pis, computers, built them, learned how to program them. So there are a lot of activities around for the young ones.
So there you go.
Thank you.
Last one.
Hi, Carrie Dever, the Center for Corporate Integrity. I just want to make sure that there's a clarification in all of the work you're doing to explain to kids that a free internet does not mean taking someone else's intellectual property, and that there's clarification as to what intellectual property actually is and the value it brings to someone. It's not always about having a job. Sometimes it's about having your idea protecting it, being able to grow it and profit from it. So I want to make sure that is part of the conversations, because the arts community has been decimated by this tech concept of a free internet, meaning you can go on to my website or your websites, government websites, and take photos off and use them for purposes that are sometimes even used around the world.
So you want to make sure that intellectual property rights are respected
From the,
and
yes, from
protected,
the ground up.
respected and
It's
protected.
part of the program.
I think
It's
we
a
can all agree with that. Okay, thank you. So he's standing next to me, so I'm a little nervous. Robert, Lisa, Tim, Dr. Harris, Daryl, thank you very much. I'm giving this away.
Let us give our gracious host a round of applause. I mean, honestly, he is. I'm almost inclined to ask you if you would be willing to commit to doing every STEM4US power lunch that we have, which we do every 2 months. And I think this is an awesome conversation, because before, when I was a member of staff of a member of Congress, there were no conversations, about this specific issue. There were some issues in general, telecommunications, of course. As a former telecom attorney, there were conversations about science and technology, but about the need to grow our nation's STEM workforce and make sure that that workforce includes women and African Americans and Latinos and Asians as well. There were no conversations, so I'm proud that we're having this conversation. But we cannot have this conversation without you. So I'm going to do two things. First of all, I'm going to ask our panelists if they would be willing to commit to partnering with STEM4US. A lot of these folks who are here, we've never met before today, but we've heard about you guys, and so we'd like to go around and to see if we would be willing to get a yes, as Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee likes to do so often for her witnesses. Can we get a commitment from you all to partner with STEM4US and
Yes.
make sure that we, Robert, can we get it?
As someone who was once an attorney, so I consider myself a recovering attorney, I'll say, depending on what partnership means.
Conditional yes. All right. Outstanding. Outstanding. Let us give a round of applause for our panelists. Let's give a round of applause for you. Let's give a round of applause for our staff. And we look forward to seeing you coming back. We'll have an event coming up in September, a big soiree. So stay tuned for that, as well as some other activities. And again, don't forget STEM4US.org, not only to get a list of STEM activities near you, but also to make a contribution.